Our therapist and author Gillian Bridge believes today's society is over-emotional and too fixated on feelings.
We'd love to hear what you think about this. 089 611 111. And Gillian joins us now. Good morning, Gillian. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a new book that the title itself, I think, will people get it. Sweet Distress, How Our Love Affair with Feelings Has Fueled the Current Mental Health Crisis. Can you tell us why you think this is true?
I think it's true because we're getting into a phase of high-octane emotionalism and excitability. Everyone has got to behave like a small child rushing around, very excitable, very kind of predicated on their own sensations rather than on what is happening in the bigger world. And to me, it just seems that this is run side by side with worsening mental health. So I've worked across the spectrum of difficulties that people might have, worked with people on the autism spectrum, I've worked in prisons, I've worked in education, I've worked as a therapist, and people with brain damage. And the thing that seems to connect so many, if you like, disturbing or unwanted behaviours is a focus on I, myself, me, and my own sensations, my own feelings. And that seems to me to be the thing that we are promoting at the moment, and yet there's very little evidence it's doing anything to help. So that is my starting point. And I began with a previous book called The Significance Delusion, trying to go into, if you like, the sort of deep things that made our brains emerge to be so self-important. But Sweet Distress is a kind of follow-up to be slightly more accessible and give people help and advice on how they can counter some of the problems that younger people in particular are facing at the moment.
Gillian, you've given the public's response to the war in Ukraine as a prime example. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think it's a bit like the response to the NHS, which they've both generated a huge amount of emotion, I mean, quite rightly, you might say, and a lot of sort of passionate involvement in the early stages. So people seem to want to have their own heightened emotional response to things. But when it comes down to actually sort of doing something practical to improve situations, people will often drift away. They've had the excitement of their own emotional high, and then they just sort of lose a bit of interest. So in the case of the NHS, there's all the pot banging and that in Britain during the lockdown. And yet I know a local hospital where they can't get volunteers to run a coffee shop for patients and their visitors. So, and with Ukraine, the idea that young people should be getting so emotionally disturbed by what was going on there, but the people in Ukraine were actually having to deal with it, that seemed to me as something of a mismatch in terms of, you know, how we are coping with things.
So do you think it's sort of an emotional facade? It's appearance versus reality that we have to display, that it's all fake emotion that you have to throw out there on Twitter or something, and you're not actually feeling it inside? Or are people feeling these feelings and you're wondering, well, why are you feeling them? You're not doing anything about it.
I think it's probably a total mix. I think there's an awful sort of cultural necessity to show that you've got strong feelings at the moment. You know, everyone has to be passionate about something. To be honest, I'd rather someone was, you know, rather effective at doing a job rather than they were passionate about it. But passion appears to be the defining feature of people's job applications half the time. So I think that there is actually a sort of cultural need or something imposed on people to show they feel a lot. But there's also a genuine feeling. I mean, I think, you know, especially youngsters, they're at a time when heightened feelings are, you know, prevalent. But for people who don't feel things in the same way, and you get this a lot with neurodiversity, there's this condition called alexithymia, which is a lack of ability to name feelings, to recognise them for the things that other people would recognise them as being. But I think they're very often bullied into actually displaying or saying that they feel things, which actually they don't really have much knowledge of. So I think it has become a sort of cultural trope, a need. Sometimes it's genuine, sometimes it's less genuine. But it's this kind of expectation and demand that we should all be feeling a lot, which I think can artificially ramp up excitability and the sort of infantilization, which makes us all unable to deal in a more appropriate way, which is better for mental health.
I think of my daughter on this. She's 5, she's just started school, and she gets asked how she's feeling and to display her emotions and stuff. But I've also noticed in the last while she's suffering when things don't go her way, and she gets very upset with it, and it's building that resilience. So do you think this has been built and taught to children and to young people, and it's the wrong thing to be teaching them?
Well, I think, the people saying, oh, you want to take us back to the 1950s or a time when people were emotionally constipated. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there are appropriate emotions for some people to feel under certain circumstances. Not everybody's going to feel the same way. Knowing what you're experiencing is good, but then prioritizing that and saying this is the most important thing in the world and everything should sort of bow down to my feelings. And I could name people high profile in the media at the moment who seem to think that their feelings take precedence over reality. This is not helpful. It doesn't help mental health at all. And the whole focus on I, myself, and me, and I explain it all in Sweet Distress, it actually is correlated with worse mental health. There are lots of scientific reasons why focusing on I, myself, and me, and my overwhelming sensations actually encourages worse mental health. So those people who say this is what we must look into are only getting part of the picture. It's how you investigate those sensations. And I have a saying, which is that feelings are really just physiological sensations mediated by cultural expectations. And in other parts of the world, the same physiological sensation might be interpreted very, very differently. In a less me-focused culture, there is less interpretation of feelings as being about me and my experiences. So they're not immutable, these things, at all.
But I understand what you're saying, right? We live in a world right here in the developed world where, yes, there is a mental health crisis. We know that there is the medicalization, people getting medicated for mental health is on the rise. But yes, we're not living under... we're not at the threat of war at the minute, imminently bombs being dropped on our heads, so people do have different responses. Do you think that social media has had an impact on the I'm feeling this, me, because it is all about that rather than the collective?
Yes, I think massively so. And the latest figures, certainly in this country, on young girls' mental health are very disturbing. And as they are more prone to using social media, one can't help but feel that during lockdown, when there was no direct contact with large bodies of people, that focusing in on the self became even more heightened. And it would appear that the outcome is worse mental health for specifically young women. And I do really think that we've got to start in schools with parenting, asking children to look beyond themselves, to go into a wider world, bigger perspective. And that also applies in education through history. It's not just about your interests in the here and now. We need to get a view as to how we came to become the people we are.
And Gillian, I would agree. I agree with you. But like when you look at even literature from back in the day, Hamlet was all about himself. He was looking at himself. Heathcliff was all about himself. This isn't a new thing. But in Ireland specifically, we have amongst males the 4th highest rate from, I think it's 16 to 25-year-olds when it comes to suicide. But it's dropping. From 2001 to 2016, the rates have dropped because we used to be a country, sweep everything under the carpet, do not speak about it. But now we are encouraging people to speak about it and suicide rates are dropping. So, I do think that it's important that we talk about our feelings.
Well, in fact, for women, it's going the other way around. So it's interesting you say Hamlet, because I talk about him in Sweet Distress. We can learn a lot from Shakespeare. It's not a case of not talking about what we're experiencing, and I make that perfectly clear in all my works. So it is not this, you should stum, zip it, say nothing. It's you should understand what's going on, you should know about it, you should have insight into your own sensations, but it's how you talk about it that is significant. So, and I don't want to sort of spend a lot of time talking about the science behind it, but essentially the right side of the brain, which people think of as the sort of creative and expressive one, is a more miserable side of the brain. the left rational side of the brain is more optimistic and positive. And so the more we can rationalize things, the more we can avoid things like PTSD. Lots of interesting research in the American military and in Dutch police forces, and over generations.
It's a really interesting topic, Gillian, and I'd say a lot of our viewers will really be wanting to get in touch with this, which we'd love to hear from them. 0896 111 111. Listen, Gillian, your book is out at the minute. Sweet Distress: How Our Love Affair with Feelings Has Fueled the Current Mental Health Crisis and What We Can Do About It. Gillian Bridge, thank you so much for joining us this morning.